Today, I'm going to be giving my full review of the iPhone 14 Pro. I'll be sharing what I've thought of the main new features, what I've enjoyed the most, and what's been giving me problems. It's been about 6 weeks since the launch, and now that the hype has died down a bit, I can give my genuine thoughts on my experience and if I think it's worth it. Before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more iPhone 14 Pro related videos. This year, I transitioned from the iPhone 13 Pro to the iPhone 14 Pro. I have 256 gigabytes of storage, and I also have it in space black. The color is gorgeous, and I love how it changes colors between a soft black. In the light, it's almost space gray and looks pretty much like the 13 from last year. At the time of recording, it's quite interesting that many iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max models are not delivering until November, which is kind of crazy to think about. And I think it comes down to a few things, but mostly the fact that the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus are pretty lackluster. The Pro has all the new bells and whistles, which could be another reason why the demand is higher. Speaking of new bells and whistles, the iPhone 14 Pro introduces some really cool new features. There's the dynamic island, the camera improvements, the A16 chip, always on display, and 2000 nits peak brightness. All of these are great, but realistically, it's not much. If you're coming from the 13 Pro especially, this isn't a big upgrade. We're talking about spending $1,200 to $1,500 for just a few features. You also get minor features like action mode, which I haven't really used, and some that are a little bit harder to test like crash detection and emergency SOS, which isn't even live yet. Let's start with the always on display. Do I keep it on or off? And my answer is on. This is one of the main new features for the phone, and honestly, I love it. I actually really love it. Android phones have had this for years, and sure, maybe Apple is doing things slightly different, but it's awesome. It took me a week or so to get used to it, and yes, it does affect the battery life, but I can't go back to what it was before. Another thing I wasn't sure I was going to like was the design of the new notch, or as Apple calls it, the dynamic island. And honestly, this thing is so sick and creative that to me it really makes it worth the upgrade. As I've used the phone more, I've discovered more apps that interact with Dynamic Island, and I actually just went on a trip and used the app Flighty, and it gives you real-time updates for when your next flight is leaving. So in iOS 16.1, we got the introduction of live activities like sports scores and other things that the Dynamic Island can now do. And I love the integration of hardware and software. With many more third-party apps adding support for this, I think this is one of those features that will keep getting better over time. I really like also too that you can have multiple layers to the dynamic island going at the same time. Just a quick thought on the display. 1600 nits peak brightness and 2000 nits peak brightness for outdoors is incredible. And I do find it a lot better than the 13 Pro. If I turn it all the way down, it's still somewhat bright. Alright, now onto the camera. I am by no means a professional. I've never used a pro camera, and any tips that I've applied to my photo taking have all been from YouTube. I don't want to get technical, so I'm going to strictly go off of feelings. And I feel like this camera has taken some of the best photos I've personally ever taken. I personally like to use the 3x camera and be a little bit further away from the object to get pictures kind of like you're seeing going on in the background of this video. When it comes to the difference between 12 megapixels and 48 megapixels and whether it's really better, I don't have an eye for that. I will say if you're in the right setting, at the right place, and you're in the right lighting, you can take some breathtaking photos. It's pretty incredible. This camera is super good, and I think I'm taking the best photos I've ever taken. With that being said, do you see a difference in the photo from the 13 and the 14 Pro? Because I really don't. The only thing I haven't been impressed with is the battery life. The phone dies a lot quicker, I charge it more throughout the day, and that's a big letdown. The always on display is probably the main culprit for why it's dying quicker, but to be honest, Apple marketing that this is the best battery in a Pro device is just inaccurate. Some quick fire thoughts. I don't miss the notch at all. I do prefer the silver bezel on my 13 Pro. iOS 16 is good, and whatever iPhone you have, it definitely feels like an upgrade for you. Oh, and the camera bump is bigger, but you get used to it quick. I will say that if you like all the new bells and whistles that Apple offers every year, and you don't mind upgrading, the 14 Pro isn't going to disappoint you. If you're on the tail end of a device you've had for a while and you want a phone for the next 4 to 5 years, I would get this one as well. If you're looking for a cheap deal on an iPhone, I wouldn't go with this because you're still going to be paying quite a bit of money, and I always recommend to get a little bit more memory, so you're paying $100 at least more to get that extra memory. So maybe check out the iPhone 12 Pro or 13 Pro. I asked a few people what they thought of the iPhone 14 Pro and what they experienced on Twitter, and here's what a few people had to say. Dur-E-Adon said, "It's not a huge upgrade. The iPhone 14 Pro Max essentially works exactly the same as my previous 13 Pro did. However, the two big changes are quite noticeable. Always on display and dynamic island. But these only matter to tech enthusiasts like me. Normal people don't need to upgrade." Masad Fakirian said, "I'm thinking of upgrading to the iPhone 14 Pro Max, although I want to see what the iPhone 15 has to offer next year." Gamer Politico said, "From the 12 Pro, yes, the iPhone 14 Pro was a worthwhile upgrade for the cameras alone. And if you want one of your tweets to potentially be in one of my videos, make sure to follow me on Twitter. I promise it's only Apple stuff." Well guys, does this iPhone 14 Pro live up to its hype? Yes, but only slightly. So that's it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Remember to subscribe. If you like this video, go ahead and like the video, and God bless. Oh, and remember, there's always going to be a better phone next year.